All right, we are live for the Wise Talk Saturday afternoon edition, and so definitely have a lot of things to talk about. But we're going to go back into time until last Sunday and pick up from there. So, how's everybody doing so far this past week?
Who's making that noise? I'm not sure.
I'm doing fine.
I'm not doing anything. Did you hear that? Sounds like a rat eating wires.
It's not me.
Someone's radioactive or something. Like a Geiger counter.
For real. Let me see if I can do something on my end.
Hey, Mike, try muting all of us
yes.
and see if it's coming from you, then work down the line.
Well, that's gone now.
No, let me see. It was gone when you muted everybody.
Yeah, now it's gone. Now it's back.
It's back. So mute one person at a time and see.
I think it's Alan.
What did I do now?
Yeah, I think it's Alan, right? Yeah, it's Alan.
Really?
Got to get off and call back. Come back on.
And Carrie, I think Carrie's audio is off as well.
That's muted.
Oh yeah.
You want me to get off and come back on?
Yeah.
All
Hey,
right.
Mike, you're talking, but we can't hear your voice.
Okay, my microphone is back on. Sorry.
Yeah. Now it's working, Mike.
Okay. All right. So let's dive right in. So we don't have any distractions as of now. Last Sunday, the Federal Reserve came out of nowhere. We was anticipating some type of cut during the week, but it came on Sunday, and all hell broke loose. So let's touch on that and share some thoughts as to what made them do it Sunday as opposed to waiting towards their typical announcement, which would have been this past week.
Well, they canceled the FOMC meeting because they've made so many intermeeting announcements. So now that's water under the bridge. And they're doing nothing but stabilizing the plumbing of the financial system. That's it.
They're trying.
You know, it's one day at a time with this, and nobody can predict where it's going.
Yeah, I think they're trying. I don't know if they're stabilizing it. I think they're just throwing everything at it with the kitchen sink and just praying that something works. And but there's a liquidity issue, that's for sure. But people forget that liquidity has three components. You've got the liquidity, you have the collateral, and then you have the counterparty risk. And I don't think anyone is really paying attention to the counterparty risk or the collateral component of it. They're just looking at the liquidity. I mean, a good example that's the Fed is doing or committing to $1 trillion a day in repo, $1 trillion a day. But if you look at how much the demand is for that, I think they do it in two $500 billion chunks, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. They're only getting about 50 only, but they're getting about 15 billion or 20 billion per $500 billion commitment. So it is a liquidity issue, but I think there could be a lot of collateral and counterparty risk in there as well.
Now, go ahead. Anybody else?
Yeah,
I got a couple. Go ahead, Ben.
I think they're basically getting prepared ahead of time for what's eventually going to roll out even more, because they basically have to actually buy up everything off it. I mean, if anybody shows up at their window with an old, like, 1984 Honda,
Yeah.
they're going to have to buy that Honda so that the Chevy, the 1994 Chevy, don't collapse. You know, they're literally going to have, if you think about it, every derivative, every bond, everything issued, every retirement program, pension program, every government agency bond, I mean, down to the Cincinnati stoplight bond of 2012. They're literally going to have to actually buy everything, or the actual market is going to freak out even more. They let one thing drop, all done.
Yeah.
So watch this. How many lending windows are there actually?
Like one discount window. That's officially the lending window. And now in the past, no one's used it because there's a stigma to it. And if you go to the discount window and give whatever collateral, that's basically for mortgage-backed securities and treasuries, that the market would assume you're out of business, and it would be a self-fulfilling prophecy. They've tried to destigmatize that by having some of the primary dealers actually use the discount window, which is just kind of a stupid smoke and mirrors thing. But to Ben's point, he hits the nail on the head. And that a lot of people say, oh yeah, Ben, you say that they're going to buy everything and put it on their balance sheet, but how does that actually happen? But they're not paying attention to all the 4-letter, what I call solutions that the Fed has come up with this last week. The first and foremost being the primary dealer credit facility. And I'm sure Steph probably knows a lot more about this than I do, but basically what that is, that's the repo market, except the primary dealers can give the Fed whatever collateral they want, to Ben's earlier point. That means stocks and government bonds. So what's to prevent the primary dealers to taking the 1.5 trillion that they have in excess reserves, going to the stock market, buying stocks, putting them onto the balance sheet, then the Fed takes them off the primary dealer's balance sheet, they go into the Fed's balance sheet, and then it's a loan, but it's a loan at almost 0% interest that most likely the primary dealers will be able to roll over indefinitely. So is that really a loan, or is that the Fed buying stocks and bonds if all these quote unquote assets are now on the Fed's balance sheet? And why wouldn't they try to do that? Because the big problem, the systemic risk, is that the consumer, the private investor, the business, the money market fund, the primary dealer or hedge funds have these assets on their balance sheet that are decreasing in value. That's the big risk for the system. But if all those assets live on the Fed's balance sheet and they get a 50% haircut, who cares? Because the Fed doesn't have a profit and loss. I'm not saying that's the right thing to do, but I am saying that that's most likely going to be their strategy.
Just from my experience from 2008, when
Exactly.
I don't know if anyone's read my bio or know my background, but it's one of the reasons why I keep the name anonymous, because I'm protecting innocent people. All right, but when I was working in banking and I was in the crosshairs with the communications between the too big to fails and the Federal Reserve on that famous weekend with Lehman.
Yeah.
And just from that, this is not 2008 by a long shot. It's so beyond that right now. So I'm not making a comparison. I just want to be clear about that. So when I'm saying that they're stabilizing the system, they have. That doesn't mean that's going to continue to be the case. It's just now on an unprecedented level in a different way, because you're still going to the ATM, and as long as they can put cash in the ATM, you're getting cash. The banks are still lending between each other. Things are still functioning, and that's their goal. They do not care what it costs. Now, as far as there's a lot of legal things that are going on with regards to what the Fed can and can't do, and there's going to be a lot of semantics thrown around out there in the media. But just on one aspect of that, the question came up, can they actually go in and buy the equities in these other things? Well, right. So like I said, semantically speaking, they're holding them as collateral. They're not literally buying them. So you can look at that any way that you want. But if they don't do what they're doing, it'll be more than you sitting in your apartment. It'll be you not having access to your capital and the financial system shutting down. So I don't approve of what they're doing and how we got here since at least 1987 and Nixon in 1971. I mean, there's a long story here, guys. You know that, right? Yeah. So it's a mess. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow in the financial system. Everything could change.
Now watch this. One second, Ben.
One last thing.
Go ahead.
In my humble opinion, is that we're moving very quickly right now into the global currency reset situation, but that can't be done with a sense of stability around the world while we're currently in what we're in until we get through this and things start to stabilize down the road. Then there's going to have to be a shift made because so much money's been thrown out there. It's just not sustainable.
Yeah.
All right, real quick. Answer this question real quick. Answer this question from Joel real quick. Will all this planned event lead to one world currency? What Steph just hit it on, religion and government, and who will lead it? America, Russia, or China?
Nope. What we are going through right now is a split. You have the progressive branch, which is the United Nations, the EU, all of the quote-unquote globalists. And then you have the other half, which is Russia and America, Trump, the nationalist branch. What we're going to have happen is Trump just hired an executive from a cryptocurrency company.
Yeah, Coinbase.
Right. Actually go in to the Treasury and write the rules for the U.S.
Yeah, but
structure. And one more thing, and then I'm actually going to press mute and let you all just run like crazy. Is I
there you go.
I know we're in deep shit, and I know they're going to print and they're going to buy everything because the Fed window, basically, they didn't announce it, but they started actually doing it last week, was they accepted paper as collateral without having any proof of ownership with those actual papers. That lets you know they are going to accept the derivatives without any proof of ownership of any of the actual paper, which means rehypothecation that we've had for years, where this guy sells this thing, this guy owns it, now the other guy owns it too, and all that. They are going to let everyone cash in on any single. You could write it on a piece of paper with crayon, and they take it because they cannot prove who owns what. So they're just going to pay off everybody.
Yeah, that was the collateral issue that I was referring to earlier. Mike, I think that one article that you had up first, if you scroll to the bottom of that and look at the last paragraph, I think that's the article I saw the other day. You'll see that this gentleman that they hired from Coinbase has actually gone on record in the past as being a strong proponent of the United States going to a digital dollar.
Tokenization version of the dollar is not just about the use of the cryptocurrency world. Who think so? In recent months, senior U.S. officials have been exploring the idea of minting greenbacks on the distributed ledger software known as blockchain. The idea appears inevitable.
Yeah, there you go. That answers the gentleman's question with the super chat. That's at least what they're going to try for.
Now, will it? So the e-dollar that's coming, will that be just a domestic currency? Because once again, I don't think China's going to need an e-dollar when they have the e-yuan redeemable in gold, possibly.
My turn.
Go ahead.
This has been great to listen to. To what Ben said, I agree they could write it on a piece of paper with a crayon, but it's going to have to be done neatly. It can't be sloppy. Okay. To the gentleman's question regarding world currency, that's one of the scariest things for me ever. If you have one currency, you have one world, you have one world order, you have one source of power, we're all screwed. This is not good. Every country needs to stand on its own. Every country needs its own monetary system. And how do you have one currency and everything related to it cover all the different countries in the world? It doesn't make sense. Just like the euro isn't doing really well. I mean, you've got Greece and Germany having the same currency. They're completely different economically. Finally, this you said it's inevitable, Michael, and I would say I don't want e-currency inevitable.
I don't either.
I want electronic money is fine. It's useful, it's helpful, but we need physical money, because if to have only electronic money means every person needs a computer access, internet access, and internet, and electricity. And if any one of those fails, you're hosed. Also, you can be locked out because you can't have any physical money. You can't store it in your sock drawer. You're totally dependent. And the monetary system is to serve the people, not the people to serve the monetary system.
Yeah, Alan, I'd like to get your opinion on something really quick. I know you don't like a one world currency. I don't think any of us do. What if that one world currency was gold? Would that make it any better or worse?
I don't care what it is, because ultimately, to me, money has many characteristics.
So even if the one world currency or money was gold coins, physical gold,
yeah,
coins, that would still have the same downside?
To me, I want every country to decide what its money is going to be. Number one, I don't want.
So do I.
Yeah. Number two, I think about what money does. Money has many characteristics, but it only has one function. It facilitates the indirect transaction. Mm-hmm. If it gets it done, it's money. Let every country figure out what they're going to do. We don't need a world dictate on this, because this cracks open the door for God knows what else. And if for example, given where you're located right now, the Incas had a great civilization for hundreds of years until they ran into two things: the wrong end of the Spanish rifles and diseases. At the time of their height, they had tons and tons of gold and silver, but they didn't use gold and silver for money. They had interesting names for gold and silver. Gold was referred to as the sweat of the sun, and silver was tears of the moon. You know what they used for money? Cacao beans, which meant for the Incas, money literally did grow on trees. And they got one heck of a civilization. So to me, we don't need a world currency, regardless of what it is. We need to let individual countries choose what they're going to use, and we'll work around it. But ultimately, and unfortunately, this is not happening in our current U.S. system, the monetary system needs to serve the people, not the people serve the monetary system.
Right. Yeah.
Speaking of
gentlemen, we're going down so many rabbit holes here, and really, it's really hard to keep track of. I just want to mention on a global currency reset, there's going to be a global. You really have to break this down, and for one, gold is not going to be a physical currency that we're going to use around the world. There's not enough gold to do that. Okay, forget about the price and that dynamic. So let's go to global currency reset. There will be a global currency system. Let's call it Brent Woods 2. I'm using that term very lightly here. It will be an electronic ledger. It'll be used for global trade. And that is how the deficit or the debit or the credit, whatever, will be settled once or twice a year through global trade between countries. Countries are going to keep their individual currencies, and how that's going to play out is anyone's guess. But let me give you an idea for the United States. Since the U.S. dollar will no longer be the global reserve currency because they will initiate this new system for global trade, which the IMF will have a point in and maybe use a basket of commodities to back it, for instance. We may take our gold and we will back the US dollar domestically by a certain percentage by gold. That way it keeps our currency, fiat or not, attractive to some degree and relatively stable because we're backing it by something. Now, if you throw the ECB into that and they've got the European Union, I mean, like I said, there's so many rabbit holes we could go down here. But for our sake, you know, something's going to have to be done. And unfortunately, other people are making that decision for us. But as far as the United States is concerned, I think that we're going to be going down an independent road that we used to exist upon. But how the world interacts and exchanges with currency and global trade is what's going to change.
Watch this. After this health scare, I think all paper physical currencies will get branded as carriers, and that's going to be easier to take out of circulation. So the next 3 or 4 months, they're going to be announcing some legislation, I believe. But go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I talked to Martin Armstrong about that, and that'll work in Europe, but it's not going to work in the United States. At least, unless people start contracting the virus directly from currency, which there hasn't been one recorded incidence of that yet. But you can't just like switch systems. There's no way to do it. It's impossible. I mean, you could go negotiate like, all right, this is worth X amount in gold. So maybe the revaluation like gold, what Jim Rickards has been saying, is really the way that it's going to go. And all currencies will be indirectly backed by gold. But the problem is that, they've never, ever kept the backing, once the bills no longer became convertible directly into gold. And even before, back during the crash in 29 and the Depression, there wasn't enough gold to back all of the dollars out there. It's always kind of been the case, unless you can use gold to purchase. I just don't believe gold is ever going to be a part of the monetary system unless it absolutely has to be, because what is the greatest power that a country has? It's that power to print money out of thin air. And maybe the EU countries have given up, but the EU itself hasn't, and China hasn't, and Russia hasn't. That is the ultimate power that you exercise over your population. And what's happening now, it seems to me, with all of the panic, mostly media induced, is just pushing everybody to the point where they voluntarily cede power to the central governments, and then they're going to make a deal. Something's going to happen. But the idea, like right now, of just saying, stop all trading, stop everything, and we're just going to, come up with this new system. I mean, you see what's been happening to the dollar, because everybody's running to the dollar. All the other currencies are really sinking. You look what's happened to the Canadian dollar, to the Aussie dollar
just got
close.
Aussie dollar just
collapsed. Total collapse.
Just to clarify a couple of things about Jim Rickards, because actually what I had just said, I was almost repeating what he had proposed verbatim.
Yeah,
but his idea was which I agreed with. There will be a global currency, and that will be digital for trade. Individual currencies will probably survive. It may or may not be backed by their own gold or percentage thereof, which, as well as the global currency, would be done as well. But it doesn't matter how much gold you have. Let's say, for example, the United States, and we got so many dollars, and you say, well, we don't have enough gold to back our dollars. That doesn't apply. It's not about how much gold you have. It's about the price that you revalue the gold to. It's not how much gold you have. So it could be any amount of gold. You could have 1 ounce of gold and say, okay, it's worth, 100 million trillion. So, and that's where the thing comes in with the reset of the price of gold with a global currency reset situation, when you're trying to back your own currency to still make it attractive, despite perceptions with people running into the dollar because they see it as, not paper or something. I don't know what's going on, but you all see that how that's happening, and a lot of the other currencies are just falling down because the dollar's going up, and that's still the remnants of the Bretton Woods system that was set up, that was broken in 71.
Yeah.
I agree with Steph that regarding the amount of gold, because before Britain, my understanding is before Britain left the gold standard, it had, the thinnest of veneers. It had so little gold compared to the amount of money it was allegedly backing. To Carrie's point about, getting diseases from especially the current disease from physical money. Well, if you're still snorting, you might inhale it from a dollar bill. But, we have to look at the greater need for more than one form of money that is physical and electronic. The other thing is that, to somebody's point about the great power, and you all know, and I won't get into it today, I always argue with the term print money out of thin air. To me, the great power, and this is the power that must be returned to the control and benefit of the people of each country, is who actually gets to create and extinguish the money used. Is it going to be for the benefit and under the control of the people of the country, or in our case, the banks? Because in the US, it's not the Fed, it's not the US government, it is only banks that create M1 money. That's what we hold, that's what we use, that's what we spend. Until we get that power back, I'll clean it up for the way Ben would say it, we're screwed.
Yeah, Trump can transition out of the old currency and into a new digital currency over one actual weekend. Very easy. Because all they have to do is create a blockchain relatively like Ripple. The structure would look a lot like Ripple, where you have an app that would basically create a wallet at every single branch all over America. I mean, every single bank would basically download this app into whatever, their computer, whatever runs their actual mainframe. And that app, all they'd have to do is look at their current balance sheet and go, okay, according to our sheet right now, over the weekend where we aren't doing no business, we have $1.9275 million. Then they would have the Federal Reserve allocate the cryptocurrency equal to or adjust 1 for 1 or 1 for 2 or 2 for 1, however they would adjust that and put that into their new wallet. And what they would do with their clients is they'd launch the wallets of their clients who hold the accounts at their banks, would launch wallets aligned with each of the accounts and allocate the amount of money that each of the account holders have into their new wallet. And over about 2 weeks, they could have their app that almost every one of their members have, their online actual banking app they could upgrade that to link with their wallet of the actual bank. And what that would do, that would be a dream come true for the Treasury. Because Trump, the biggest problem they have right now is they need people to get money yesterday. And this structure, they could literally airdrop money in every wallet with one click. It'd be the simplest thing. Happens in cryptocurrency all the time. That way, if one part of the U.S. is having a quote-unquote liquidity problem, they airdrop money into those wallets in that area. Happens all the time in cryptocurrency because it's the technology that will allow America to inject capital into the ground floor, which is their citizens and maybe their lower income citizens, so they could literally program an airdrop where every wallet that holds under $1,000 would receive $1,000. So if you have a big wallet, if you're rich and you've got a big wallet, your wallet won't qualify for that airdrop. It's the perfect structure for the Treasury. And that's why they hired this guy that's going to bring this in. And when they launch it, they can literally launch it over the weekend, have it wrapped up in 1 week. And literally, that's why I think they're slowing the economy down. They're changing the engine while the engine is idle. Or they're not even changing the engine.
I think they're changing the tires when the thing's going 180.
Right.
I think that's more like what they're doing.
Real quick, before we move on, there's a question for George. Real quick, let's get the question answered real quick, George, if you don't mind. Elmo last night explained why we haven't seen inflation in Japan. The monetary stimulus is stuck in the reserves of the BOG. If you don't mind answering that real quick.
It's a fantastic question. It's something I've asked myself 1,000 times. My video last night did not cover that. Why that could be is, to your point, the reserves could be stuck at the BOJ. It's basically under your mattress. So all those quadrillions of yen, if you just stuff it under the bed, it doesn't get out into the system. The Japanese have a 30% savings rate, or up to, it fluctuates quite a bit, but it's been as high as 30%. So even if the government is spending that money into the real economy, if those people in the real economy just put it right back in the bank, it goes right back to the reserve account that's held with the BOJ. Yes, it just doesn't. It doesn't. And then you've got the demographic problem in addition to that. So it's not to say that the problem in Japan will never hurt them, as though they can continue to print all this money. At some time, they've got to pay the fiddler. And so I think it's quite dangerous for the people in the United States to look at Japan as a model as to what we can achieve through modern monetary theory, and that we should use it as a cautionary tale and understand that the United States economy is quite different in the standpoint we maybe have a 2% savings rate if we're lucky. And that's a lot different than 30%. The government prints all this. Well, if the government issues all these bonds, you have to ask yourself who buys the bonds and with what money, right? So the Japanese had the money to buy those bonds. And do the Americans at a 2% savings rate have enough money to buy literally trillions of dollars worth of bonds that are issued, deficit spending by the government to handle all these bailouts? Maybe, maybe not. But I think that the gentleman was getting close in the sense that it had to stay at the reserves for the BOJ and not in the economy circulating, or else you would have seen price inflation.
And that's what you had in the United States with all of the excess reserves being kept with the Fed that the banks had. So it was $1.5 trillion. It was over two at one point, and now that money's kind of been dissipated. But as long as the new money doesn't hit the stream there, we do have inflation, but it's how you define inflation.
Yeah, it goes back to what Alan said with the banks, and also the TGA as well, which is most people don't realize that the TGA, which is the Treasury General Account, that got moved from the private banking sector onto the Fed's balance sheet back in 2008 or 9. So why is that a big deal? Because all the reserves that were in the private system that could get out into the real economy, let's call it $400, $500, $600 billion, now sits at a reserve account with the Fed, because that's the Treasury's money, and it's not able to get out into the system, where before, if those reserves were held with the private banking system, they could use those reserves to buy financial assets or lend money against. So it's a very complex situation, and most people really don't understand how the money comes into existence. And they see the Fed, creating trillions or committing to create trillions of dollars, and they think they're just injecting this money into the real economy. So they're just completely baffled when there's no Zimbabwe type hyperinflation. But they just need to dig deeper and understand how the transfer mechanisms work. And if they're able to take the time to do that, and it doesn't take a real strong intellect, or I think a fifth grader could understand it if they just took the time to research it. But then that'll help the average Joe out there much better prepare for their financial future and have the ability to take care of their family.
I wanted to
go ahead, Alan. Go ahead.
Well, to what George said, well, I do understand how money's created, and I easily got a fifth grade education. So I agree. Basic monetary system education is not complex, but it's incredibly necessary.
Yeah.
Because one of the things we're not focused in on is, and I truly, really enjoy what everyone says. I learned so much being part of this group. But what we're not focused in on is what the Fed does has nothing to do directly with money. It only has to do with reserves. Reserves and money are not the same thing.
Right.
The other thing is that there's one thing that is incredibly simple to me, and if whoever disagrees, just bring it. But there's one thing that's just stares at me every day, and I think it's incredibly simple to understand, and that's the national debt at $23 trillion. Okay, this is money owed to people, to businesses, to pension plans, to countries. Our federal government is running, if not the biggest, one of the biggest public Ponzi schemes ever, because the federal government can never repay this from profits. That's why Bernie Madoff's doing 150 years right now. And taxation for me is not profit making, it's profit taking. How long is this Ponzi going to go? And what happens when countries around the world, because of what's happening around the world, their economies hit the fan, people aren't working, they're not generating incomes, there's nothing to tax, there's no tax funds going into the government.
Right, the U.S. government.
And I don't like calling it revenue, because to me, revenue implies profit making, and taxation isn't profit making, it's profit taking. Well, when they can't collect this, countries around the world are going to start wanting to redeem their treasuries when they come due, because they're short.
Yeah.
And then the U.S. government can't find any buyers for its treasuries. And one of the biggest buyers overall for decades has been Social Security. Starting this year, I'm told Social Security will no longer be a net buyer of treasuries. It will be a net seller. And by approximately 2034, 2035, according to the trustees, they'll run out. And that's when, if nothing changes, benefits will be cut by maybe 20%. Bottom line is, our country, which means we individually, are faced with an absolutely massive, unpayable treasury debt. And forget the unfunded liabilities of Social Security and Medicare. If we don't deal with the system that created this, going to any type of new currency, or however you want to phrase it, electronic, physical, yada, 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 doesn't matter. We're still looking at an unpayable debt created by a specific monetary system. We have to change the system. And last thing, just to put it in everybody's mind, to give some understanding of how massive or astronomical a trillion is, 1 trillion seconds is equal to 31,709 years. That's how massive 1 trillion is.
All right, so I think you got to look at this like this. Never let a crisis go to waste. So assume that the government didn't deliberately, or the powers that be didn't deliberately trigger them, which you can argue about, but we have no evidence. All we have is theories and speculation. We can't point to one guy at J.P. Morgan Chase. Well, he made Jamie Dimon need heart surgery so he could go in there and put his thumb on the sell button and screw everything up. There's just no proof. Okay, so we have to make an assumption that, let's just say it came about the natural course of things. Well, we were talking about this, things that were going to change as a result of what we're going through now. So number one, people are going to be washing their hands all the time. So we should see much less influenza in the future.
Yeah, that's true.
All right, that's just one stupid example, but these things are traumatic to the general public, and they alter behavior into the future. Another thing is telemedicine. All right, the Congress has been fighting telemedicine. The medical lobby's been fighting it. Now all of a sudden, oh, it's a great thing. Let's have telemedicine. All of these things, working at home, public schools, online learning, the teachers' unions that dominate these huge school systems are totally corrupt and couldn't care less about the kids and have doomed them to failure. Well, all of a sudden, they've been fighting online education, which kind of is tantamount to home education, homeschooling. They've been fighting it for decades now. And all of a sudden, it's like, all right, everybody get on the computer, except in Philadelphia. There's a number of changes that are going to be made. And I think, hey, I'm up for Social Security, probably a lot closer than anybody else here, and Medicare, 2.5 years. All of this is going to be changed now because they've got the emergency, and pretty soon they'll have the emergency powers to change all this. And that's what never letting a good crisis go to waste is all about. It's kind of like in 1933 when FDR got elected, and then all of these New Deal programs that were implemented, all in the name of an emergency, could never get rid of them. Well, now we got an emergency, and we're going to get rid of them through executive action because the Congress will never do it. But because it's an emergency, it gives the government license to do a lot of things, a lot of them bad, downright evil, but they've got the ability to do this now. And this is not by accident. This is what is going to happen. And things like, all right, all of our medical stuff, our antibiotics being made in China, and medical supplies, I guarantee you that's never going to happen again. The decoupling and the end of globalization is the emergency is the perfect excuse to do it.
Yeah.
Like what really pisses me off about the whole thing and this is a little bit of an aside, but I wrote an article about it. If anybody wants it, just shoot me your email addresses, or I'll send it to Michael and you can pass it out. But the damn bailouts, all right? They're giving us $1,200 or $2,400 to buy peace for bailing out these huge corporations like Boeing and like the airlines that spent $100 billion buying back their own stock over the past decade. George, if you're like me, you probably shook your head and said there's no economic justification for this other than to jack up the company's per share earnings and enable management to reap huge bonuses that they were totally not entitled to based upon the operations of the companies. IBM was one of the worst companies about this. So I think that this is another change that's going to take place. We got to start looking ahead to the changes, and the changes that are going to affect everyday life, economic life. And of course, the big one is the monetary system. What are they going to do about it? I think that the concept of the global currency in terms of achieving globalist objectives, which is always its purpose in the past. I mean, look who started the SDR, the International Monetary Fund, a totally pure globalist organization. If it happens, it's only going to be there to facilitate trade, not to actually give us one happy kumbaya world, which we see what happens. It doesn't exactly work out the way that was intended.
Yeah, I think I'd like to address just a couple things really quick. What Alan was saying when he was talking about the 23 trillion in debt, I think a lot of times people have a hard time connecting the dots on that. And I think it's very important to do so. If we can't afford the debt, what does that mean for the average person? That means your mortgage rates go through the roof. So imagine the next time you go to get a mortgage, it's 14%. That's what Alan's talking about. If the foreigners can't buy our debt because their economies crash, and we can't buy that debt domestically, and Alan's saying we can't pay back the trillions and trillions of dollars, most people see that, and it's just they don't get it, what that translates to in their real life. But what that translates to is higher interest rates, first and foremost. Second, with the Boeing bailout that Kerry was talking about, it's such a complex thought experiment to try to figure out what the pros and cons are. First and foremost, I'm in no way, shape, or form in favor of a bailout. I think they should all go bankrupt, and the people who have the funds that were prudent should come take those airlines over, or XYZ company, and they would be run better in the future. But the flip side of that coin that you have to acknowledge is that look at the average 401k. Let's say it's $200,000 for someone who's just getting ready to retire. Well, what if half that 401k is in Boeing stock? And because we make them go out of business, they take a big haircut, the equity takes a haircut. And then let's say we have something that comes back in and doesn't allow buybacks on a moving forward basis. Buybacks were 100% of the stock market going up since 2010. And again, I'm not saying I'm in favor for this. I'm saying it's just something we have to be cognizant of. And then what does that do to the future purchasing power of the average American in the United States, where the economy is 70% consumption? I'll give you an example. A good buddy of mine, he knows someone who was just all their lives, they've taken every single penny they've ever saved, and they made quite a bit of money, and they put it into Boeing stock. They weren't really sophisticated. They didn't care. They just like Boeing. I'm going to put all my eggs in this basket because Boeing is the best, right? Well, as of maybe 3 or 4 months ago, they had over $4 million in Boeing stock. $4 million. All right. Now they've got maybe $1 million. So that means that just that one person's purchasing power for the next 20 or 30 years has decreased by $3 million. So they can't spend $3 million into the economy. If one man's spending is another man's income, how does that affect the U.S. economy moving forward if the stock market goes down by 50% and or housing and doesn't recover? So I want to be very clear, and I'm not advocating for for propping these businesses up, bailouts, buybacks. I'm not saying that at all. I think they should all go bust. But there is a flip side of that coin that we have to be cognizant of.
Well, that's why I created the Taxpayer Bailout Bill of Rights. So unlike last time when we bailed out all the banks and we let management stay in place and did absolutely nothing, there were no strings attached to that money where it had to go. And here, my first thing is the immediate termination, if they accepted, of the top 5 members of management who presumably got them into the mess. Number 2 is perpetual prohibition on all stock buybacks. 3, permanent ban on all lobbying of federal, state, and local governments by that company. 4, termination of all golden parachutes. The guy who got Boeing into this mess caused the 737 MAX, or was responsible for it. He left and he got $80 million. All right. Withholding of management bonuses for 5 years, prohibition on linking management compensation to stock price. This is one of the biggest issues that has caused this mess of buybacks, because when all they care about is the earnings per share, then it's a simple matter. If you decrease the denominator, the numerator goes up, right? Then prohibition, bonuses only allowed on increases in company profitability and free cash flow. That's the way Warren Buffett rewards his management. Cessation of all social welfare programs and benefits by companies until the loans are repaid. 50% clawback of the past 3 years of management bonuses, and no contribution or sponsorship of any political activities, and a complete prohibition on payments to PACs. And I think
Don't let them go out of business.
Boeing is a national security issue. You can't.
But they don't go away. It's just another entity that has that type of management skill set that you're referring to will take over, because they. What do you? You saying there's no more
disruption? There will be disruption of vital defense. I'm in favor of letting them go out of business, or at the very least bankrupting them. But there's certain companies, just like there's certain banks. Look, you let Lehman go out of business. They didn't exactly do it right, but we're still paying the price for that one. So conservatorship, whatever, I'm in favor of that. But in terms of allowing, I'm in favor of bankruptcy. I'm a lawyer. I handled a lot of bankruptcies. But when you're dealing with a Boeing, 2/3 of their business is defense related. You just can't let them chapter out. The government will never, ever allow it. It's not going to be. And airlines arguably are national security as well, because in times of war, they got to move the troops around.
Yeah, but I don't understand. Like, let's take an airline as an example. I don't understand by letting them go bankrupt how that, and that doesn't stop flights. That's not like the airplanes disappear. I don't understand how that affects
an orderly bankruptcy. When there's 5,000 other mega companies going bankrupt at the same time, you are not going to have an orderly, because then the banks will go down the drain too. It will be a cascading thing that it's just not manageable.
Hey, Carrie, are you talking about a Chapter 11 or Chapter 7?
It doesn't matter, because
if it's a Chapter 11, they're still working. If they're Chapter 7, it's out. Chapter 11, you could get. Well, number one, I want to sign your Bill of Rights. I'm behind that, and the other is if they go into Chapter 11 and they have to work themselves out. To George's point, at least they're still operating.
Maybe.
Excuse me. To your point, they're still operating, but to George's point, a lot of changes can be made and demanded in a Chapter 11, whereas if it's Chapter 7, it's all over. The assets sit there, and it can get ugly really fast.
Yeah, well, obviously we'd be talking about reorgs, but the problem is if Boeing goes, 5,000 other companies that will go bankrupt, and you'll have you'll have debtor in possession. You will have banks going out. You will have the debt markets in a complete tumult. They need to be purged out. Don't get me wrong, but to just leave it to the legal system to solve these issues, it's not set up to do it. It's set up where I have a company, it's losing money, it's got some value going ahead, or it's got some assets that could be sold off in a liquidation, and it doesn't weigh societal benefits. It's really ruthless, cold-hearted, and the people that make all the money in the bankruptcies are the legal profession. That's the way it works.
This is a great
Economy
conversation.
What's that?
This is a great conversation that we could have had a couple of months ago. It's irrelevant now.
Oh, it's not irrelevant. It's not
It's
irrelevant.
absolutely irrelevant. The whole American economy is going bankrupt. Taco Bell, your local plumber, your local pizza place, where the economy is being shut down so that everyone files bankruptcy at once. You guys are having a conversation about Boeing going bankrupt, and this is going to trickle to this. This is going to trickle to this. You're arguing over the woodwork being rebuilt in one room of the Titanic. It's all going down at once. There's going to be a reset, and then Trump and the Treasury Department is going to reallocate and re-liquidate, if that's a word.
Really?
It is now.
The whole economy will be up at once. Right.
Yeah, but Ben,
It's going to be bankrupt.
to
I
your
got
point,
one quote I want to run out here, and then I'll be done. I don't want to bother you guys.
oh, you're not a bother.
And no, I'm not saying that I am, but don't take it personal what I'm about to say. I'll put it out on Twitter, and it's a common thread that's running through our conversations. I agree totally with Gary where you're going at with this. You know, the bankruptcies are something they're going to have to deal with. Beside the point that, you know, in some sense, the whole freaking world's going bankrupt at the same time. I get that. So, you know, I wonder who's the most liquid one. Who's going to be standing while all the other countries are collapsing? But forget that. Just forget that for a minute. And I just want to go down this quick road. That quote I wanted to mention. You know, everyone's starting to lean toward the socialism thing in some respects. Not everyone here. It's not what I'm saying. Versus capitalism. So with that said, what I put out was I said it's stunning how this pandemic is shining a light on the beauty of the Constitution versus low information mainstream media and citizens that do not understand or appreciate it versus the intricacies and bureaucracy involved in rolling out the response to a crisis of this magnitude. We've never dealt with it before.
So it's a lot of interesting back and forth. But watch this. Like at this current moment, did we skip past a recession and we're flat out in a depression? And then what's the time frame of this? Because I believe this 15-day U.S. shutdown, I'm seeing a lot of militarization. People are sharing with me. And so what will this depression look like? Is this something that will unwind, or after this blows through, we in a whole new world order?
Yeah.
Well, before we get into the craziness, I'd recommend. I've been tracking this thing, and I'm doing it on a daily basis. There's a website called Johns Hopkins Coronavirus Resource Center. You can go there and get relatively current information on all the confirmed cases, God forbid the deaths, and recoveries by country. And the last time I totaled it up before we went live today, at least I think it's relatively accurate, is around 290,000 cases worldwide. I didn't get to the deaths, but the crazy thing is when you look at 290, and I'm not making light of it, but you look at 290,000 cases, and as of March 2020, you've got a world population of 7.8 billion. The percent of the world that's been infected is 0.0037.
Yeah, Alan,
This is not. This is.
but let me point out one thing there, Alan. What you have to
Yes,
do
sir.
is you have to go back and look at those numbers over the what was it 5 days ago, what was it 2 weeks ago, and what was it 1 month ago. What you'll see is that it's doubling every, they call it 3 or 4 days. So if there's 300,000 right now, 3 days ago there was 100,000. To get to the first 100,000, it took 2 months. So, and then I'm not saying those are literal numbers, but so
No, I know that.
exponential curve. So yes, we could have 290,000, but that just means in 1 week we'll have 2.9 million. In 2 weeks we could have 20 million, and all of a sudden you've got a big problem right there.
Well, Nat, I'll tell you, as I said, I'm tracking this. Yesterday it was, again, round numbers, 263,000, and so I'm going to be tracking this every day to that point, because California shut down. You know, the governor, or what I like to call Comrade Newsom, he's saying that of the 40 million in California, in 8 weeks, 25.5 million could be infected. Well, I figure John Hopkins is a pretty reliable, steady source for these numbers, and I'm going to be tracking them. So next week, I will be able to tell you, if you guys aren't looking yourself, what the numbers are.
Well, you have over 1 million for sure. But make sure, Alan, you look at when it first started, when this John Hopkins, they first started putting out the data, look at how long it took to get to 100,000. It took a month, and now all of a sudden it's getting an extra 100,000 every 2 days. That's the exponential part.
Here's the deal. This guy who's a Nobel laureate in biophysics and basically predicted the curve of the infection rate in China and when it would, when the curve would bend and slow down. What he said is the best evidence we have of what the disease can do is the Diamond Princess cruise ship. And that ship, there were 700 people. They were stuck there for weeks. They were all had communal dining, and they had HVAC, the same HVAC. Everybody was exposed. Only 20% of those people actually contracted the virus. Of that, 1% died, 7 people, with really not much advanced medical care, not what we know now. And what you see is that a large percentage of them had no side effect. And a lot of these were elderly people, because older people generally are the ones that go on cruises for the most part, other than the holidays. So the point is that the natural immunity rate, according to what he's extrapolated, and I'll just assume that he's right because he's a lot smarter than me and he's already calculated this, is 20%. But what he says happens is that there's he likened it to diminishing interest rates. The rate one day is 30%, next day is 29%, and it goes on, and then lower. Well, that's what happens with new cases, because initially somebody is infecting 3 people, but then they're infected because of social distancing and all that. They're infecting less and less people, to the point where it goes down 1.5 people every 3 days, and the rate goes down from there. So this thing is not going to be the Black Plague.
But Kerry, how do you explain the numbers going when the first 100,000 it took a month, and to get the last 100,000 took 3 days?
Well, okay,
to explain that? That's not slowing.
But that's not everywhere.
That's not what?
That's not everywhere.
That's everywhere outside of China. That's the collective number outside of China.
Gentlemen, the number we need to be looking at is Italy, okay? Really, the boat is under the water already, and that was used by the virologists and the epidemiologists and the Nobel laureates, but that's in the past, because now there are multiple strains that have mutated. It's a different ballgame. You want to talk about the United States? Look at Italy.
Yeah.
Well, let's see.
Yeah, look at
I'll tell you what, guys.
Italy.
Let's see what happens next week, because I'll be tracking. And again, I'll take the position that John Hopkins is a reasonable source for these numbers. On today's list, Italy has 47,000 cases, and yesterday Italy had sort of differently.
53,000 as of today.
Yeah, 53,000, isn't it?
Yeah, right now 53,000.
Well, again, according to John Hopkins, when I looked at it, and I try to look at it at the same time every day, so it's the same. Italy had 47,021 yesterday. Italy's they didn't report a change, so maybe it's gone up.
The United States is slowly moving up that list, you notice, and it's going to be at the top eventually.
The thing is that given the measures that are now being taken, I don't see how this thing is going to go exponential week after week.
Yeah, you got to look at the report that Neil Ferguson just came out with. He's a UK professor, and you'll see that even if we do quarantining, such as Italy, it does reduce the R0 value. So it is definitely a good approach, but it doesn't reduce the R0 value below 1. And that's the key. It still has the R0 value somewhere around 2 because you're indoors with other people, your family members. There's still ways to spread it. So it's a great point that we should strive for that because it lowers the R0 value, but it doesn't reduce the exponential. Well, it reduces the exponential growth curve, but it doesn't make it go away.
Yeah,
so here's a question. Hold on, one second. Here's a question. Does anybody truly believe China's numbers?
No,
because they are on this graph here.
No,
they're
Mike.
setting the standard.
No,
so,
Mike.
Yeah,
that's why Italy's so important.
Yeah, I saw something on Twitter today, and obviously this is anecdotal, but this is a gal that's in China, and she's in finance or in macro somehow, but she pointed out the subscriptions for the company, their main cell phone provider. I think it's China Cell, and in the last, call it 2 months or last month, their subscriptions went down by 8 million people. 8 million. And you see a graph going back like 2 years. So it's not like they have fluctuations of 8 million people going back and forth and back and forth. It just drops off a cliff. So her line of thought is it's anecdotal, speculating, but did all those people just leave their cell phones? Did they lose their cell phones? Are they not paying them? Or are they just
dead?
Yeah.
So no matter what the evidence I think John Hopkins is in bed with all so they're giving us our data for now. And so I don't trust none of this data because China's information is false. John Hopkins said the U.S. is the most equipped. They even gave President Trump a graph saying that we're the most qualified and ready for this. But then 2 weeks later, we're scrambling for masks. So all of this is just to keep us distracted from what's going on because all this numbers is just Yeah.
Well, what source would you?
Italy.
Yeah, but Italy apparently was very slow.
No, it wasn't.
Elderly population, intergenerational living, which we don't have in the United States, and densely packed cities, as we see.
Why is Africa
importation of Chinese labor, just as Iran did? That's why Iran and Italy blew up. But
exactly.
but the dynamics of the spread and how it's taking place in the medical system that Italy has is what is equal to us, and at least we're probably getting the best data from anywhere is coming from Italy. Yeah, I may subscribe to South Korea as a possibility, because they're somewhat capitalist. But Italy, I think, is a really good barometer for what we can expect.
So why is there no activity in Africa? Why does Africa on this map look to be like the place you might want to go?
All right, so the theory of the guy who came up with using the quinine-based drugs to treat the coronavirus is what he noticed was that places where malaria was still active in the world weren't getting infected.
Right.
So from there, he figured, well, what is it? And that is because they're taking these drugs for malaria, the anti-malarial drugs. And that's why you're not seeing the infections there. And then extrapolated that to maybe it will be an effective treatment, which we don't know yet, but the initial 3 studies look promising. This thing is not the plague. No, 80% of the population is naturally immune to it.
Hey, Michael, this is Alan. I'm going to have to go in a couple minutes, and this has just been a great. This has been a great chat. I just so enjoy listening to everybody. But if you don't if you don't trust John Hopkins as a source, give me another source to track these numbers, because I really do want to track these numbers by country, by day, to see what's, and fine, we can ignore China for, I'll still put it in there, but we're looking at Italy, Spain, Germany, Iran, United States, France.
Okay. New York just said they're not going to test anymore because they can't contain it. And now they're going to the secondary, trying to protect the vulnerable population. So you're not going to get accurate numbers no matter what from any place. They're not going to test anymore because testing is a waste of resources.
Kerry, did you say New York that was?
Yeah, New York just announced today they're going to stop testing because they've got over 7,000 cases. It doesn't matter. It just takes the resources away from the people who need to get treated.
Exactly.
That's what it is. So you're never going to get any accurate numbers. You basically can toss that thing in the garbage. It's just, and then the other issue is, of course, the undiagnosed asymptomatic cases or mild symptoms, which is the vast majority of it, supposedly 86%. We don't know the exact number on that. We've never had any research where there's been a random sampling of the population to actually figure out how many people have it. But the one thing they were showing was that in New York and other places where they really started testing in the past week, it was 12% of the people they tested had it, which means that 88% of the people had a cold or sniffles or whatever and said, or they just were exposed or thought they might have been exposed or who the heck knows, and just went to get the test because it's also free. So there's no economic penalties for taking the freebies, right? So as a result, but only 88% of the people taking the test don't have it.
Right. So let's look at the U.S. population, for instance. And let's just, for general numbers, if approximately 10% of testing is being infected, and then you can break that down to the level infection, and whether it's death or hospitalized, the whole 9 yards. 10% of the U.S. population would be what?
30 million.
Just as an example, about 33 million, right?
And then 86% of it, or 85%, will be asymptomatic or mild symptoms.
And with the testing, with so many people being infected, it's been running rampant in the country since at least second to third week of January. So it's been spreading and seeding, and so you test somebody, it's helpful in one degree. I'm not saying it's not helpful.
Yeah, it just
but you get to a point where you just got to deal with the fallout versus the test.
Yeah, it has nothing.
Does anybody?
It's hospital capacity.
Agreed. Does anybody on the call know anybody personally who's been infected?
I know who.
And my niece is best friend in Vegas is in the ICU.
Oh my gosh.
I know. I got a friend who has asthma, and my mom is, I don't know that person personally, but my mom lives in a retirement community, and they're already in lockdown because there's one person quarantined.
Yeah, and this is a gal in her 20s, has basically a collapsed lung.
Oh my gosh.
In the ICU. That's my niece's best friend in Vegas.
Oh God.
I have a client who lives in a really nice retirement community, basically, big buildings, everybody's got their own place, kitchen, everything. So it's really nice. I tried to go get some information from her yesterday or 2 days ago, and they stopped me at the gate. I found out the hard way. As you're saying, the whole place is in lockdown, and if you are not an essential medical person, you don't get in. Which for older folks who need that family interaction,
it's really bad.
It's really bad, and yet how closely are they monitoring the people that work there, and where they're going, and who they're interacting with, and if they have another job.
Hey guys, I got some data I think you'll be very interested in that came out last week. There isn't new data yet. It doesn't address any particular issue, but I think it'll shed some light on some of the topics we're talking about. Just let me go pull it and get it ready, and go ahead. I'll throw it up on the screen when I get it.
Okay.
I got to bow out to go to my next show. So everybody, please be safe, stay well, and I look forward to next week. And Michael, thank you so much for bringing us all together.
All right.
Take care, everybody.
A couple more minutes and we dial back. Appreciate you, Alan.
Send out
Take care. Bye-bye.
your Bill of Rights document, okay, Michael?
Say again.
Please send out that document. I sent you the article that I wrote.
Yep.
Okay.
Where's it at? The J Post?
Not that one. I sent you an actual email.
Okay, I'll check it out.
On there.
I will send to everybody. Yes.
Yeah.
The idea that they are going to quit testing in New York is ridiculous. They are not going to quit testing. They're going to tell us that they're going to quit testing because the point where they don't want the numbers reflected in the media. Now, because what are they going to do? They're going to have people walk in and go, hey, I feel bad, I got a temperature. All right, well, no problem. We have limited equipment, but we're just going to take your word for it and assume that you have this with all of our limited equipment. They're not going to do that. That's stupid. It makes no sense. But what does make sense is to limit the information to the general public. So you announce that we're no longer going to test people, which is going to make us look at those maps and go, all right, well, this is all irrelevant now. We can't have any maps showing us anything because we aren't getting any accurate information. And the reason they're doing it is we're right at that hockey stick moment. You know, if every evening or on every one of our shows, we're showing that rise every couple of days where it's like doubling, quadrupling, and blue, blue, blue. That is information that they cannot control.
Anyway, I got to run also.
Okay, good deal. So I want to bring this to your attention real quick.
Yeah, bring up that chart.
Bill Gates wants national tracking system for all this health scare. And so this is a part of the plan of which they may stop testing publicly, but yet everybody who's going to be tested will be in this database. And the database, what is the database for? It's to track who's infected and who will be an ideal candidate for whatever the vaccine that they're going to roll out first, which is going to make it mandatory. And within that vaccine, you're going to be a part of their system. If you want to engage in their system, then the social credit score stuff comes into play next. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all winds out. But Steph, where's the post?
I got the screen share right.
Okay, there you go.
Did the other guys leave? That's a bummer.
Alan had to leave, and then Carrie. So we'll dial back in a couple minutes.
So the numbers are not, the total numbers are not relevant right now, but this is from Dr. Henry Nyman, the virologist, been doing this 45 years. He's the guy who discovered the SARS mutations and connected it to the COVID-19, yada, yada, yada. But this was the numbers as of March 16th in the United States specifically. And I'm sure these have changed, but I want everyone to take note of the 20 to 44-year-old age group. That is where the highest infection rates are.
Yeah, and look at the ICU admissions.
Right.
In the hospital.
So yeah. That's why the kids at the beach are a real freaking problem because they're spreading it. For instance, in Miami. Mm-hmm. But this is, you can look at this and you're just going to be increasing the numbers. The case fatality rate's going to shift because the numbers are going to shift. But this is a pretty good sample of what you can expect when all is said and done.
Yeah, everyone gets fixated on the case fatality rate.
Right.
And they say, oh, what's the big deal? What's the big deal? What's the big deal? As long as old people don't get it, we have no worries. But then they just completely ignore the hospitalization rate and the ICU admissions at, call it 4% for that age group. We'll just do the math.
Right.
I mean, just do the math. It's
Yeah,
just,
when all said and done, we're going to be somewhere between a 10 and 20% case fatality rate. More than likely, it'll be 1918 pandemic stuff.
because
By just looking at these numbers.
right, because of the fact, not necessarily because it's that bad, but because the hospital system cannot handle that many people. Therefore, your case fatality rate goes up because you can't treat people that otherwise would have been cured easily if you would have had just a simple hospital bed. And that doesn't include the people that can't be treated for a stroke, a heart attack, a car accident, a burst appendix. I mean, just go down the pregnancy. I mean, go down the list of people that will not be able to receive health care at any cost because there's simply not a hospital bed. And if you look at New York as an example, I was just watching CNBC briefly the other day, and there was a New York doctor on CNBC, and I think this was last night, and he was saying that they are totally overwhelmed and that he is like a neurosurgeon, something like, don't quote me, but he was something like a neurosurgeon, and he was having to stop everything that he was doing and go to help the department that's handling the coronavirus. And he said, I really don't know anything about this. I'm just having to read like a pamphlet really quick to get caught up to speed so I can help out in this other area where I needed more. And that's, he said he'll most likely have to do that. There's been nurses that have already had to do that. And this is what it's coming down to in New York. And look at the amount of cases they have. They have what, maybe 7,000, 8,000 cases total. And it's already overwhelming their hospital system. So it's not about the case fatality rate. I just say it till I'm blue in the face because people don't get it. It's about how many people will need a hospital bed. That's it.
That's why Italy is such a bellwether. You see the videos coming out of the hospitals in Italy. It's like they're telling us, you know what? It's coming. Get ready. Don't fight over it. Just be ready for it. And you'll be better off in the end, right? You know?
Well, I don't know because Steph, I'd like to get your opinion on that. Have you heard the rationale for, I'm not going to say letting it go through the system, but the only way to really beat this is if you build herd immunity or you get a vaccination. And is there an argument for letting it slow burn to an extent where you try to keep the infection rate under that curve to where you're not creating this over demand for the capacity of the hospital system, but at the same time, you're trying to let it work its way through the population to build up that herd immunity. I heard that we have to have 80% of Americans get the coronavirus in order to have the herd immunity needed for this thing to be completely in the rear view mirror. So, I mean, is there an argument for that, or is that just crazy? Because if we try to play that game and it gets above the curve, then millions of people die because of the hospital beds. I don't know.
I wish I was more prepared to answer that because I probably was if I could have just pulled up some of the numbers and stuff before I came on board. But just be a free thinker here for a moment. And what you just said, and I've seen the articles, it's like, well, you know, let's just infect everybody. You know, let's do it, you know, and just see what happens. Okay, let's go to the casino and roll the dice. I get it. Everyone seems to feel that way. But let's compare this to what they actually do by giving a vaccine. You know, they were already, and I'm not talking about this vaccine, which we don't have and I wouldn't take when it came. But let's just talk about the flu vaccine, which is based on the 1918 flu. And the basis for that vaccine is from the mid-1950s. And that's a long story. But that's what vaccines do. We're basically infecting people in order to allow their bodies to build antibodies. And then they're infecting other people that aren't vaccinated. So it kind of reverses the argument. I don't know. I wish I had an answer. But I think the bottom line is that when you're dealing with Mother Nature, this is what viruses do, and it's going to mutate again, and there's going to be another wave. And I don't think any of us know or have an answer. And I'm glad I'm not the president of any country or working in government. And God bless them.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to do it.
Social distance. That's a new word that will probably go down in history books as something that the president wish he would have done, because he got a stage of his people behind him. They're not distancing whatsoever. So, well, everybody, it's been more than I could have ever imagined. We covered a lot of subject matter there. So I appreciate everybody taking time to join us and share your thoughts and everything like that. So real quickly, sign off. let people know, everybody know where everybody can be found at this point, but just in case.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? Bitcoin Ben. Check me out on YouTube and also on Twitter and on Facebook.
Just for me, it's just my name, George Gammon, right at the bottom of the screen on YouTube and Twitter.
Hey, Trader Steph on Twitter, and you can get to my website from there. It's on the profile.
All right. Well, everybody, enjoy your rest of your weekend and stay safe. And definitely we'll connect sooner because everyone's going to have a lot more time on their hands to connect via video. So be blessed, be safe, everybody. Thanks for tuning in and see you guys later. Peace.
Hey, thanks,
All right.
Mike. Thanks, Ben.
Bye, guys.
Thanks,
My pleasure.
Hi, guys. Have a good one.